Success does not reveal the quality of a leader. Setbacks do. When things fall apart, we discover whether we have the emotional capacity to learn, to adapt, and to lead forward. To speak how setbacks can sometimes spring us forward is Youssef Skally, founder of Scalability Coaching and the Walking Coach. Welcome, Youssef.
Thank you, Dr. Carolina. Always pleasure.
Always, it's always such a pleasure to discuss things with you because, well, you're brilliant and you bring such global perspective to it, and the emotional regulation as well as emotional intelligence.
Adaptability.
Right? I do like that. So leaders, who thrive in today's world are not those who avoid setbacks. They are those who transform adversity into wisdom, understanding in uncertainty into clarity, and disappointment into a new direction. Now, you as the leader, have to do that publicly under an insurmountable amount of pressure. Let's talk about that. Where does it begin?
Well, I'm loving the topic of today's conversation. The same way as I loved the previous one, and I'll be loving the next one because I know that we are really addressing topics from different angles, different perspectives that are rarely spoken about. But just the first caveat I would like to do, because as we said, it's that setbacks can be a spring forward, but we are not talking here just about a simplistic way that, oh, something had happened and there is a happy ending, everything worked out for
or failure is part of success.
Exactly.
Which, it is.
Exactly. I like this collaboration with you, Dr. Carolina, because we are not in the toxic positivity approach that, everything has a happy ending. We know and we recognize you and I have been through ups and downs, and we know that life is rarely that neat. So what we are talking about is that why not every setback becomes an opportunity, but still every setback creates or presents an opportunity to decide what's next. So we are not really talking about just bouncing back from any setback, but bouncing forward in a different way, and it might be in a different direction.
Yeah, understanding. When people say, and I don't want to come across a little bit cynical, because really I don't prescribe to that, but when people say everything happens for a reason, right? No, it doesn't. There are things that occur, or if there is a reason, certainly beyond our understanding and beyond our scope, right? All we're left is with the outcome. And I am like you. I have to say first, I have to preface what I'm going to say, that when I was doing the research for my dissertation, I really was able to reframe how I thought of failure. It was just, nobody expects you to get it right the first time, right? If you do, then your method was not rigorous enough, right, to understand where the flaws and the gap in the missing parts are. So I did do an absolute reframe of that. What I am really intrigued about is that it is the juxtaposition between the personal and the public leadership.
Right.
When the leader is really expected to compartmentalize anything that is happening to the person and put on this brave, face. I find that is sometimes unattainable, and really, and I think the leaders ourselves create create an unattainable expectation in an outcome.
And I like
That
what you
really
said there.
intrigues me a lot.
I like what you said there, because what I see with many leaders I coach, it's that while they might figure out how to recover, and I'm putting it between quotes, professionally, they still struggle, because we are never taught that, to process the setbacks from an emotional point of view. Because we have to admit that in every setback, there is a loss, and there is an external loss, and there is an internal loss. And most of us, we would focus on the external one first, which is that common definition of
Optical illusion.
optical illusion. Exactly. And then at a second stage, we might focus on the internal loss, while in my opinion, both go hand by hand. And I will even put the internal one as a fuel to the external one, rather than the opposite.
Yeah, and I remember during my days in corporate, you and I have a little bit more flexibility, not 100%, right? But a little bit more as a solopreneur and as an entrepreneur. But I remember in corporate having, my corporate years were in my 30s, and like early, was it even early 40s? Not really. It was like I was relatively young, and my peers, many on many occasions, were ladies my age, right? And they were going through, life things, and there were tears, and there were like, meetings, like, by committee, trying to help, bring someone's hurt to be better, right?
Right.
And I remember looking at them and thinking, that doesn't apply to me. Like, I cannot, especially as a CFO, CHRO. Like, who does human resources turn to, right?
Yeah.
Is, and just not having that luxury to be
Right.
able to process, and for people to know you're hurting and give you a little bit of grace, right? When you're leading and something personal occurs, I you internalize it. You
Absolutely.
internalize it. And then if you don't, you park it, you pin it, but often we forget to reconcile with it and to process it.
Yeah.
That's where
Yeah.
you come.
Exactly. That's why I put the internal loss at the front stage, even before the external one. The external one is easy to see, and usually it's status, it's income, it's title, it's a person, a relationship. But then what is really internal? And as you will say, Dr. Carolina, having that space to internalize it, process it, and then reflect on what we do next. Because the question is not whether setbacks happen or no. Setbacks do happen. And some would say for
Every
reason,
day.
yeah, exactly. And some would say for reason or no. But that's not even the question. The question is to pause, reflect on what happened, and then what we do next, where we go from there. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be a straight line. I still get really surprised when I meet with very accomplished leaders that still think that success is a straight line in a way or another. But when we look at it objectively and honestly, whether our leadership journeys, career transitions. I'm just reflecting on the people I work with, the entrepreneurship journey, as you mentioned, the executive mobility, and even just life itself and changing country, losing a person, or very few meaningful stories follow a straight line. That's the exception. The straight line is the exception. So all the stories, starting with mine, yours, and the people we work with, and we know, they're filled with setbacks. So setbacks, it's not necessarily a failure. They're filled with setbacks, filled with disappointments, with losses, and unexpected turns. Now, the idea is that how we adapt externally and internally to that and move forward.
That's where a lot of the wisdom comes from.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the word wisdom is being, again, like our societies did to positivity, to masculinity, to values, to faith, they attach a negative connotation and or philosophy even, and they now we're doing the same to wisdom. As in my opinion, everything is a wisdom. Every experience is a wisdom. And I keep hearing people saying negatively to someone else, "Oh, that's a very wise advice," but in a negative way,
Oh,
in an ironic way. And I said, well, there is no irony about wisdom. That's wisdom comes from experiences, from lived experiences, comes from observation, comes from reflection, comes from grieving, comes from really pausing and thinking and rethinking and rethinking.
yeah. I want to talk about grieving because it's a very close cousin to conflict,
Yes.
grieving. And someone asked me, "What is conflict?" Actually, at a pod, it was at a podcast, and I said, "Well, in my opinion, it's pretty much anything that doesn't go your way, right? Anything that's not going how you wanted it is conflict that you are having to navigate, right? Because not all conflict is a fight, right? Some conflicts is just an opportunity for understanding, or it is like we said, an opportunity to process. But why is it? And I love what you just said. Actually, I'm just thinking how something can be said almost as a compliment, but there's a heavy load, there's a negative load that goes with it. With the word grieving, like the word emotional, like the word conflict, there's such a negative aura around those words.
Yeah, but first, my definition, it's not a definition per se, but my lens toward conflict is a misalignment, a clash in values. So whether it is an internal conflict or an external conflict. And it doesn't mean if I may have a conflict with you, but it doesn't mean that we don't share the same values. But it might mean that at the moment, what triggered that feeling of conflict or perception of conflict, that I felt that you are projecting a value that contradicts one of my values that is present at the moment at the front. So when we take a step back, and then I remember that me and Dr. Carolina, we share a lot of common values. That's part of the conflict resolution, in my opinion. So to me, conflict is linked directly to values. The same thing to grief, the same thing to that. Why? Because most of the time, why we give it, in my opinion, negative connotation, because our brain think systematically of what to do. and
Or what does it look like?
yeah, and less on how to be. So that doing versus being, it doesn't work systematically with conflicts. It doesn't work systematically with grieving. It doesn't work systematically with loss. Sometimes you don't need to do to take an action immediately. You need to process that. So when we think of that, like, okay, there is this kind of, I don't know what to do right now, then it becomes negative. So for me, the question is stepping away from immediately thinking, what can I do? And stepping into being instead of doing. And that might shift the energy from negative to a more nuanced one, toward grief, toward conflict, toward that. It sounds very simple, but yes, I like to make it simple, even
Mhm.
though if we talk about grieving, it's a complex process. And there is no single grief that is identical to the other one. But here we are talking about setbacks. And again, when we talk about setbacks, and every time I hear that word from a client and I ask for explanation, what does it mean, setback? Immediately it goes to failure.
Mhm.
Setbacks are not always failure. And then the cases that I face most of the time, it's a failed project, a lost client, a missed promotion, or a business challenge.
Yeah,
But
or a venture. Yeah,
exactly. But I
that is
came through
working
the
out on
years.
timing or how you expect it.
Yeah, but I came through the
Sure.
years to understand that setbacks are not always about failure. They are about a loss. And before we can move forward to that spring forward from a setback, we often need to acknowledge what we lost. Because it can be a plan, it can be an expectation, a part of
Mhm.
an identity, a sense of certainty, most of the time, a sense of
Ego.
yeah,
It could be as shallow as just sheer arrogance and ego.
yes, exactly.
Now, you just said something that I want to explore. As a leader and entrepreneur, right? How do you, in your opinion, how can someone communicate what is it that they need in order to grieve and process? Because I do think that it is different for women and men. And put layer onto that scaffolding culture and age and generations and nature of the setback and all of and stigma, right? All of that. But in your opinion, how can someone just buy themselves a little bit of grace?
Yeah, it's a multi-layered question, and
Of
again,
course.
it's different. It's different from one person to the other. The the first thing, and when I work with executive leaders who are grieving even without naming it grief,
Mm.
the first thing is I work with them to understand that there is a part of grief, and that grief it's not only about death. Grief is about life, and it's about many things that we lose in our life. And we rarely talk about the professional grieving. I experienced it, and I know what it is, and I work with my clients on that. But the first thing is really to understand what they can ask. It's ask a grace that you mentioned to understand. And often we ask to being understood without trying to understand ourselves first. So
Mm.
instead of being understood, it's That's very important, but first take the moment to understand and ask for help to understand yourself. So
Or
that's different from coming to you and saying, Dr. Carolina, I don't know what's wrong with me, and I want you to understand me. Then saying, Dr. Carolina, something is wrong with me. I need your help to help me understand.
to help me solve it, which is usually the
I
first
wouldn't
go
even
to.
go, yeah, I
No,
wouldn't even go
no,
to,
I know you are doing it. That's why we need you. But it's usually fix it or help me
exactly,
solve it or help me
exactly,
move through it, right?
yeah,
And,
exactly.
recently I experienced a situation that wasn't, especially when you're a high achiever, you forget, right? Like you can, hit every pitch, right? Like this, and so you have outcomes that you were not expecting. And I was saying to somebody, and I was rambling because they kept asking and asking. And I'm just like, I don't know, I don't know. And I realized I heard myself, I want, and it's like, I don't know what I want. You know what I mean? It's like is, and I think a big part of working with a professional like you, and I do conflict resolution or conflict reconciliation, a little bit differently than the stream you do, of course, but is that when we're trying to help, we're not listening or we're not asking for the right questions, right? And I do find that to be a challenge, a men-women challenge, right?
I would I would agree with that, and just it leads me to question I would like to ask you, because that ties to that when we don't recognize this part. So from your experience with your own experience and the people you work with, what happens when we skip that process of acknowledging, that process of understanding what we are going on, or the process of grieving itself? What happens? What have you seen?
You know what I do, and I've learned, for anybody, any professional that thinks that coaching is just a verb and not a skill set that is
Yeah,
acquired through training. Um, what I have learned is that when I am professionally and personally, sadly for those around us, when you're working with someone in the industry, you are going to deal with, our skill set.
right.
Um, what I do is I call it out. Like I
Okay.
will ask a question to do with grief, and I'll ask a question to do with processing. And if they do not want to deal with it, I do articulate how important it is, and that it's okay to pin it and get back to it. But I do say out loud how important it is, because if you don't acknowledge it, the third point in this equation is grieving, processing, and redirecting. If you don't take the time to grieve and to process, what are the chances of you being able to gather any new information to redirect and not just repeat?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I often tell my clients when they say, "Oh, I want to learn," immediately on, again, coming back to action mode, immediately they would say, "I want to learn from that setback and I want to grow from it. So I want it to end as soon as possible." And I do believe that growth doesn't begin when the setback ends, but rather when we start processing what it came to teach us and what we can learn from it. And that's when, in my opinion, the growth from setback starts.
Brilliantly said. I love that. And I will definitely quote that. They often say that coaching occurs in between sessions. And it's when you have those conversations, and it's not just coaching, it could be mentorship, it could be parenting, it could be, nurturing your relationship, nurturing yourself, right? This is why journaling, and I'm not speaking to your diary, I'm speaking Marcus
Yes.
Aurelius kind of meditations, right? When you take the time to read between the lines, to see what's happening
Yes.
between the occurrence, what's the transformation? It could be simply that now you notice something that you didn't notice before. It could be as simple as that. That's the only ROI out of this tragedy, right? Is and it may not, the ROI, if we must say it, or the growth or the gain or the insight transformation may only come years after the fact. Like, you know what I mean? Like, is such a process. Like, life is the process.
Exactly. Yeah, well said.
I
And
just had
and life and life rarely asks us to bounce back immediately, but rather to adapt forward.
yeah,
Even I wouldn't even say I use a lot move forward, but in reality, whenever I'm saying moving forward, I am thinking adapting forward.
yeah,
And to adapt, it's important to understand and to reflect and then move back. And I want to touch on the resilience part, that it's often tied to the setbacks. And I find it fascinating that, in my opinion, resilience is one of the misunderstood concepts. Whenever I talk about resilience, people hear pushing through. And to me,
or stubbornness.
yeah, exactly. To me, resilience is not about pushing through. It's not about enduring more. It's not about holding on longer or being tougher,
Victimhood.
especially
Yeah,
for men,
victimhood.
being tougher, but life and my coaching has taught me something completely different from resilience. And I learned that sometimes resilience is really not about holding on. It's also about letting go. And that happened in many of my own experiences. So it's letting go about my assumptions, letting go about part of my identities, letting go of definitions of success that no longer serve me or serve our listeners. So in my experience, for example, the most resilient decision I have ever made was acknowledging that something needed to change while I was at the peak of what appeared to be a successful career, and decided to leave my corporate leadership job.
Yeah,
To me, that's a form of resilience.
amazing. So we are navigating some of the most difficult times in our history, right? Between the consistent and accelerated and chronic pace of change, and trying to speculate markets and outcomes and technologies and things that truly even the experts are taking their best guess, right? To fail or to have a public setback can be a gift in knowing the skill set to how to process it in order to redirect, because rushing back to it, if you think you don't have time to process, and by rushing back all you're going to be doing is repeating it,
Absolutely.
really you're wasting more time than if you had taken the time to just really, really reflect.
I like that. I like that. Setbacks can be a gift, yet I would say it's a gift in how to say en route, in not yet delivered.
Well, you travel.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's a gift in progress. If you
Yeah,
don't,
in
or
movement.
I would even call it's a wrapped gift. You still have to unwrap it.
Mm. You gotta do the work.
Yes,
That's what I'm taking away from
yes,
it. Do the work, even if nobody else wants to walk that journey with you. Do the work. Take a journal and go for a walk, especially with Youssef. But if that aside, journal, process, because you owe it to yourself as a thought leader and as the best person you can be. Wow, that was
yeah.
an
And
interesting chat, Youssef.
yeah, I would like just to close with the idea that not a single setbacks. So that's for all our viewers and listeners to remember that not a single setbacks will define you. What
Mm,
will define you, neither your success, by the way. What will define you is what you learn and how you respond to that.
got nothing else to say. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Youssef. And we are More Than Success. Success Connect Theories every Tuesday at 1 o'clock with Youssef. Thank you. Until next time.
Until next time.